You alright? I'm the world around you, and this is Pause for Thought on Threshold FM. And this week, we're dipping our toes into a film that I feel like it's going to purposely try to mix up our minds. It's going to try and make us think it's poking fun by concealing its propaganda as movie tropes and parody. But I don't know anything about this film. I've never watched it, never really heard of it. It's just one of them that slipped me by. I only really know what the synopsis tells me from it and from the name of the title, where I can work out from that. This week, we're watching the mainstream Lemon Party. It's 4 blokes in a bath. This week, it's Hot Tub Time Machine. But first, let's have a song. This is a bit different to what I'd normally play on here, so I thought we'd start off with it. This is Fat Mike's on Drugs Again by Less Than Jake. The first part of the film is a flash. It's like a montage. It's sort of showing us with a bit of music playing in the background, and it's a flash of this evolution of man from ape to man, you know, with the different stages in between, Neanderthal and all that. So straight away, it's getting that sort of anti-religious stuff in there in order to help indoctrinate the masses into this new religion of science. This, right, gets followed immediately by several, if not dozens, of images of people drinking alcohol, beer bottles, them red cups that are synonymous with drinking booze in America on telly. Now, is this a way of how the Americans would say, drink the Kool-Aid, quote unquote, in a sense of, in like how Mary Poppins, they would, you know, a little bit of sugar kind of thing, you know, do you know what I mean? Like, in this film, will the newly founded religion of quote-unquote science be the medicine, and the alcohol is going to be the sugar that helps the medicine go down? Then, we see a load of women in bikinis with, you know, with the cleavage on show and that, and they take centre screen along with this black lady in a bikini with slightly larger breasts than all three of them, slightly to the left, possibly using that Fibonacci scale to avert your gaze from all of the images of alcohol on the screen. So you're focusing on the tits if you're a man, because you want to see the cleavage, and you focus on the boobs if you're a woman, because society has conditioned you to compare yourself to every other woman in order to make you feel insecure about yourself. Now, there's also a young child in one of these images, and also, could this be one of Hollywood's very subtle ways of introducing acceptance to paedophilia to the viewer? You know, the viewer's aroused because there's tits on screen, you know, and there's blokes with their tops off in baths, but there's also a child on screen and all. This seems like a really clever way for the makers of the film to be able to make their lives much, much easier in the future. Then, there's loads of flashes of images, like how the brainwashed people in films in the olden days, and I tried to pause them as frequently as I could, and they all have alcohol in them and what appear to be young children in water and swimming costumes. Maybe it's not a paedophile thing though. Maybe it's a way of brainwashing the masses to drink more alcohol and to reproduce to make more kids. Now, it is worth noting that all of these photos are taken of people in outdoor baths or hot tubs, so straight away, we've also got our water reference in for this episode. They're trying to make you believe water is real and water is there and water is what they say it is, trying to make us want to be wet or submerged in whatever water actually is. And now, as the starting sequence ends and we get the first frame of video footage, we see multiple people walking dogs, except, right, they're only little dogs, little small dogs like Chihuahuas and Bichon Frises and that. Now, this ties in with my fears that I keep telling you about on the Patreon episodes on patreon.com/worldaroundyou, about how it seems like the government of the world are preparing to take all of our dogs away from us. More dogs attacks in the news, more restrictions on breeding around in different countries through Europe. They don't want us having bigger dogs that can protect us. They want small dogs that jump all over you, need to piss 5 times a night and bark constantly. All so that there's this extra thing in your life just inducing stress. They can't tell us not to have dogs because, you know, people love dogs. They're never going to be like, you can't tell me not to have a dog. But when they take all of the cool dogs away, like, you know, like your bulldogs, Rottweilers, German Shepherds, and then all we're left with is fucking wiry-haired things like Jack Russell and shit things like sausage dogs that piss all over your house because of their tiny little bladders, then we, as the public, stop buying dogs and they get what they want. And that puts even more working people out of business, because then all of the puppy farms, right, from council estates and that, they go out of business, so that fucking pug farmer can come in and start battery farming dogs and sell us genetically engineered smaller dogs that can hold their piss in for longer than naturally bred small dogs that just normally stress everyone out. Now, if we couple all of that with all of the coffee that you see in films and alcohol in this film, you've pretty much got our bodies in metaphorical versions of those fucking stress positions that they make the last 5 contestants do on that SAS programme on Channel 4. But getting back into the film though, the first words we hear, the first bit of dialogue in the film is, it's about lifestyle change. And to remove people's dogs, that'd be a fucking huge lifestyle change, mate. Then there's another bit where they say it's not about losing weight. So could he be speaking about the viewers' dogs with this? He's messing with a dog on screen, this character, and this message, right, is then coupled with this dog on the screen as if to really get it in there that they're trying to take our dogs away from us. A British Bulldog's on screen as well, which seems to be one of the dogs that's up for extinction, along with the Bull Terrier that's on a big picture in the background, which is another dog that normally gets demonised by the anti-canine media that's all over the telly. Now, I don't get why it's alright, right, to force some animals into extinction that people like dogs and bulldogs and what are called like brachiolactic breeds with the the stub noses and that. Why is it all right for us to wipe those out, but we can't let the pandas die out, right? Think about how much time and manpower and money gets wasted making panda porn in order to just arouse pandas. All that time, money and resources could easily be put into effect to manufacture a higher quality of porn that's more accessible to the public and a lot easier to appreciate as the general public. It's very hard to watch panda porn and get anything more than a semi. Now, we see another quick glimpse of a bloke in a beer bottle now, but the character turns his face up at it. He's not interested. So maybe the propaganda or messaging in this film is going to be some form of anti-drinking stance, which makes sense in a way because drinking does tend to relieve stress, although the eventual fallout of drinking, like pancreatitis and cancer and brain damage, they tend to be quite stressful, but they're not till later in life. We then get told not to yell at our dogs. Our dogs, mate, they're our dogs. Like, they want our dogs to not respond to our prompts so that they've got even more reasons to take your dogs off us. What are we supposed to do when the dog goes off the lead, gets, snatches out of his collar and runs away in a park? Just fucking whistle and, whistle quietly, and whisper fucking, Rover, no, Rover, come back, Spot, no. And it just gets fucking ploughed by a fucking truck, mate. What are we supposed to do? It's fucking stupid, mate. They're just adamant about taking our dogs off us, and I never expected that in a film. I never expected that, to be honest, to be the first message within the first 30 seconds of a film called Hot Tub Time Machine, right? Now, it might be a stretch, but maybe they're going to try and take our dogs away from us when they take all of our cars off of us in 2030. And now I'm only saying this because the character then pulls a car key out of a dog's arsehole and that key's covered in shit, meaning that you wouldn't want to go and use that car key, meaning that you probably wouldn't want to drive until you've at least washed the key. But ignoring the washing the key part, you're not going to want to drive because it means you've got to touch this key covered in dog shit, right? And now that is a way to turn people off of dogs as well. Maybe they're going to use dogs as the excuse to finally restrict the freedom of movement of people as they take cars away from them in 2030. Maybe the electric cars will mostly be self-driving by then, by 2030, and all the microchips that the government is forcing people to put into their dogs, right, over the past few years, maybe they're going to start to make sense in hindsight because they'll interrupt the signals from the cars and cause the cars to mount pavements and kill people, and it'll all be blamed on dogs. Who knows? Now, a nice little bit though in this film now, right? there's a little mention of a taxidermist, which is always nice. You know, it's always nice to be represented in media, innit? Because there's not enough of it, in my opinion. I think there should be a taxidermist in every single TV show and film, because in my personal life, I encounter fucking tons of taxidermy-related things. But apparently, it's not how it works. The next things seem like they're just trying to set up the characters quickly. There's no real messages or anything like that. Like, we meet a lad that lives in his uncle's cellar, which is a bit suspicious and weird, but other than that, not much. His uncle's just lost his wife. She's not dead. She's just ran off with his telly, which seems, again, weird and bad storytelling. And another bloke just sits in his car whilst drinking vodka, whilst filling his car with exhaust fumes, his garage up with his car's exhaust fumes, and his car, because he's got his windows open. Maybe another way to try and put people off of drinking, so that subliminally in their head they're getting the message of drinking booze will kill you. And then we see them in a hospital whilst they're saying about how busy they are with work, and then there's a picture of the American flag in the background that says freedom underneath it. Maybe that's their idea of a joke or something, or it's maybe, some way to indoctrinate the viewer into thinking this is what freedom actually is. Now, it's weird because there is lots of stuff in it about not speaking to your friends. The basement lad doesn't seem to have any mates. He lives in a virtual prison on his computer, which isn't even me being hyperbolic. He plays a game where he's in prison. Whilst the older guys have got friends but don't see them. There's also a lot about how everyone uses their phones to call people, but no one answers and uses the calls. Maybe this was preparing the public for phones becoming multi-use and being used for things that aren't actually calling people, but we still call them phones. Because this is back in like 2010 or something, 2012, I think. Now, there's a last bit in the hospital where they're telling the guy he should wait for the nurse to do this bit to pull out his pipes, but he refuses, which could be a way, I was thinking, to try and turn people away from healthcare, even though this is an American film, so maybe it's to encourage the viewer to overcomplicate their healthcare by doing it themselves, so that in time their hospital visits cost them more money and makes the hospitals more money in America. Now, we see an introduction to the concept of nostalgia wanking as well at this point. Could this have been the first film that was made in order to trap the viewer in a mind prison set in the 1980s? Still 12 years after this film came out, so it was 2010, right? There's still loads of stuff coming out now, a dozen years after this film, that's set in the 1980s. There's another thing going on in the film, though, and all. It's almost like they're trying to show the younger viewer that the older people have got their own form of language. The younger guy doesn't understand anything that's happening around him, and the older people aren't helping him to understand it. Possible preparation for the us versus them of modern day, with fucking boomers, zoomers, and whatever else the fucking weird delineations of age get called on the internet. Now, they primed the older people to hate each other back in the day with punks, mods, rockers, and now they use that instilled desire in older people to hate and tell them to direct it all at younger people and the children. Then we're told it's progressive to take a woman's name as a surname, but we can see that the bloke in the film is clearly ashamed of it. Maybe a way of showing us how men are victimised and worn down by society, all whilst women are prepped and for a better life and propped up by society. We then see that the older people have been drinking, but the younger guy, he's refusing to drink, which shows there's some form of fucking definite propaganda going on here, doesn't it? They don't want younger people drinking. They want to close all the bars, pubs and breweries around the world and replace them with cafes, so that you drink more coffee and then become more and more anxious, so that then they can sell you more antidepressants, mate, more cigarettes. Also, I can't think of many Costas and Starbucks and that allow dogs inside, whereas pubs let dogs inside. Coincidence? Maybe. Maybe not. But, maybe I'm onto something. They get rid of the pubs, they get rid of the dogs, then it's just cafes, everyone's in cafes. Plus, if you think about it, if they really push the coffee and stuff in TV shows like they did with Friends was a TV series built around the idea and concept of going out paying for coffee and drinking coffee, rather than just putting the kettle on in your own kitchen. And going there with friends and buying imagine buying coffee in rounds. Like, oh, is it my round? And then by the time it's the fourth round, like, fucking, is it my round? I think it's my round again, isn't it? And you're off your fucking face, mate, feeling sick, shitting through the eye of a needle, toilet roll sales are through the roof, everyone's anxious, everyone's on edge, and then they start doing all the crazy shit in the news, terrorising you with news stories and that. But anyway, if you want, that sounds more like a Patreon rant. Let's have a song. This is 91 by Action Bronson. Now, at this point in the film, all of the characters are moping around being miserable. Then they say about the misery and the regrets, and at that moment, the doors fling open and expose an orange glowing hot tub, which seems a very sly way of showing the average viewer anyway how misery is used to impact the world. Could the orange water, maybe even more specifically the hot water, be used as a way to indicate how the weather is affected by the people of the world? Could man-made climate change, man-made global warming, could it be a real thing? But it's not by cars and the Industrial Revolution like we're told on telly. Maybe, instead, it's manufactured by the belief of millions of people believing the weather and that the water is changing the world. Who knows? Then, we see the people drink loads of booze in the water. Then we see some Russian drink with, quote, banned chemicals affect the electrical components of the hot tub, and we start getting some weird montage of people appearing and disappearing around them in the hot tub. Could this be a way of showing that there are multiple realities taking place in the same space at any one time? There's even a furry of some sort, like a bear, a man dressed as a bear. Maybe a way of showing there's a dimension of werewolves or Sasquatches, just like we've learned in other weeks of these episodes in the past, like in the werewolf episode and the Bigfoot episode that we did quite a while ago now. But also seems a nice little way of just dripping the idea of, you know what, you could fucking dress up as a fucking animal, you know, and have a go with people in baths and that, you know. Then they all have weird faces and masks on out of nowhere, maybe to show that these creatures can take the form of people, these interdimensional creatures that these could be representing. But there's something about them that's clearly not human. In this case, in the film, the rubber face that they all seem to now have. But it might be a way to prepare people for learning about the uncanny valley in the following years, just from this film, just setting it up for people where they can see these masks and be like, that's not right, that. And then we've come to learn about the uncanny valley. There's a bit then where they're all skiing and snowboarding and everyone's dressed in bright colours. Maybe in a sort of a We Happy Few kind of way, you know, like that PlayStation game where everyone's on happy pills and that. Everyone appears, you know, all bright and colourful and the world seems great. But that's just because they've got all the pills in the system. Well, what if in reality the world seems one way to most people, innit? Because everybody drinks alcohol all the time. Everyone's constantly pissed. Everyone is always either drunk or hungover and just waiting to drink again. Now, I'm not sure, because it's become kind of hard to read into at this point. Maybe we're getting a little nod towards a reality shift that's took place. There's loads of stuff about time travel constantly on TV and films at the minute. That new Buzz Lightyear film, that's all about time travel. The TV series Dark, that German one, that was all about time travel. And even the MCU, the fucking Marvel films, they became this weird time travel thing. It's in everything, right? Like they're trying to mentally prepare us all for it just in case it happens to one of us. Just in case we get swept away through time like Al Bielek did. We then see that these people are in their younger bodies, which is a thing that's thrown around a lot on the internet and all, this idea of rebirth. The souls of the rich and famous being horsed into the bodies of younger people so that people can continue controlling the world with never really changing hands. We see that the youngest guy is the only half-real person in this world, which is weird because he starts flickering. Now this adds to my hallucination theory that I've been developing. Might not have told you about this though yet, because when I'm walking around town and that, I keep worrying that everyone that you see might not be real, and that you only see people there because you expect to see people there. Some of the people probably are real, or at least you exist to each other, but for some of the people you see, they're only visible to some people. Or maybe everyone is real, but not always visible to you. Now, to me, this helps me understand why when you do go to town, there's never been a time when you go to town where everybody from that town is there all at once, because statistically that's got to have happened at least once somewhere and the floor caves in. But it's just something you never hear of, and that makes me suspicious that people are real. Anyway, with the film, this makes it feel like it's a film that's been made in order to teach us about sensory deprivation tanks. Now, Chevy Chase makes an appearance here, and he seems to be some form of Men in Black character, except he's in blue. and he doesn't have the sunglasses and that, and he's not got like a painted on face like Ingrid Cole. Now, maybe it's just some form of a play on the words "the boys in blue," and he's saying it's a call that he's answered from within. So maybe if you put a few people in sensory deprivation tanks at the same time, maybe you're all able to travel to that new world together, just like how that guy that used to rape dolphins was able to go back and forth to what was called Echo to be able to discuss things with the ethereal entities there. That's one of the reasons why he kept taking ketamine and trying to rape dolphins, wasn't it? So that he could manage to speak to these creatures. Now, they start referencing all the different time travel tropes like Terminator and the butterfly effect, almost as if to say, look, we've tried working this time travel stuff out before. We've had attempts, we've gone back, but we've gotten it wrong. But this time, we're going to get it right. This is how we think it works at the minute. This is how we're doing it at the minute. So if it does happen to you, you need to do it this way. Otherwise, what you're going to do is you're going to create a whole new timeline and you'll never be able to go back to the place where you came from. Then in the film, it's just all filler. Just not much happens for a while. But we do get another little paedophile bit. There's this girl bouncing around on one guy in a bath with her tits out. And then he starts going on about how he's got a wife, but she's only 9 years old at the minute. So again, right, there's a sex scene, there's tits on screen, actual nipple on show, opening up that arousal part of the human brain, whilst also referencing paedophilia and what can only be assumed as grooming. Now, this film is making me feel weird, innit, now at this point, which does seem like bad timing to say after I've just mentioned the pedo stuff, but in real time, where my notes are concerned, 2 minutes have passed since I wrote that bit about the grooming. Now, everyone thinks the people are acting weird and out of character. When I was younger, I used to have loads of people say that to me growing up, that I was acting different or I seemed like a different person all the time and things like that, and it just confused fuck out of me. But maybe this sort of thing happens all the time and we just aren't self-aware enough to realise that our bodies have been taken over by these futuristic ethereal versions of us. What if that's what the ethereal entities are? What if ghosts aren't dead people? What if we're all just alive right now and occasionally moving through time to relive parts either on purpose or accidentally? What if that's why the ethereal creatures prey on negativity? What if they're not evil? What if they're just me and you trying to take the bad stuff away and remind us of times where we remember at that point but don't remember yet because it hasn't happened yet? Anyway, getting back into the film rather than all this esoteric nonsense. My point there has literally just been solidified, though, by the way, which is really weird. The characters are now experiencing things that didn't happen to them when they were last in 1986. So could this be to tell us that if we do get a rego of, life, like in Groundhog Day, except it's our entire lives, not just one day where we try and shag a journalist? I wonder at what point in the cycle I've got to be at, though, because by talking about this, that means I've become self-aware of the cycle. Now, does that mean that the equivalent of Mr. Smith is going to come and try and put me in a more miserable world because obviously I'm not happy in this world? But that's a different film, and I don't think we'll ever cover The Matrix because there's probably not that much in The Matrix, to be fair. It's probably all there on purpose just to muddy the waters. Now, there's a little bit of programming going on here when the four main characters sit around and discuss why they aren't sticking to the plans that they put together. The youngest guy says that this woman wanted to be a Chinese finger trap, and then he says, and I'm not saying that because she was Asian, which almost feels like propaganda, doesn't it? It feels like they're trying to teach younger people that they should self-censor themselves in like preparation for Twitter's boom that was coming in the following years around that time, around 2010. Because that's something that didn't really start to happen until the years after this film. People censoring what they say and not saying certain things and being scared to even use the name of a type of people, of a race or of a group of people. I don't know what the right word is. Look, it's almost like I'm self-censoring now because I'm scared of saying the wrong thing. See, maybe the film's gotten to me as well, or the years past this have gotten to me, and I don't even watch that much TV and films. That's why I think I'm able to find all these hidden messages that other people don't see. Right. We then see that items can be brought into the past from the future. We're seeing the world without the characters in it, if that makes sense. So we're now seeing, in this part of the film, we're seeing the world without the characters present in it. So we're seeing completely different characters' points of view, and they're finding these items that have been left there, right? Maybe to show us that time travel has come and leave things here, maybe on purpose, maybe accidentally, and it's all getting blamed on them being Russian spies at the minute, which seems to make sense because we always blame weird occurrences on a group of foreign people, innit? I mean, until recently, where Americans have started blaming most of their problems on incels, but we just need to, like a mask, if you like. We just use a mask to cover up the time travellers or the dimension jumpers. A way to stop people from realising that these things are even happening in the world. We just blame it on a group of people instead of saying, actually, it was a group of 5 lads that accidentally electrocuted themselves and threw themselves back in time. Or it was this group of lads that was on a massive boat and we were trying to turn it invisible, but what we actually did was shift it 2 foot in the water and then cause a few people to be thrown through time and a few other people to be melded to the metal of the ship. You know, they don't want people knowing that, innit? Now, they do then mention in the film the 21 Jump Street, which is a film, right, from 2 years later, but was also a TV series that hadn't actually aired when this film is set in 1986. It didn't air until 1987. Which seems like they're trying to show us that there are different timelines. One where TV shows from 1987 are available to the public at least 1 whole year before their initial release. Then there's this weird recurring character that keeps popping up who says they're a journalist. She writes for something called The Spin, which you could easily understand as the Earth or the globe because, you know, the Earth spins. So maybe she's a way to try and teach people, i.e. the viewer, that the media is there to manipulate you, the news is there to manipulate you by making you go against the correct path, or maybe even to make you follow the predestined path so that the time travel works out in the way that the people time travelling want it to work out. But what if the news is actually our real life equivalent of Skynet and they're manipulating the world and history itself? But let's have a song. This is Dance Now by Kenny Mason and JID. Today's episode is brought to you by HelloFresh. Do you feel like you're stuck in a dinner rut? With HelloFresh, you get fresh, pre-measured ingredients with mouth-watering seasonal recipes delivered right to your door. Skip all those trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. You can now enjoy cooking and get dinner on the table in half an hour or less. With over 25 recipes to choose from each week, there's going to be something for everyone to enjoy. All recipes are designed and tested by professional chefs and nutritional experts to ensure deliciousness and simplicity. I quite like the look of this chorizo pepper and sweet corn naan. It looks like to be a pizza on naan bread, or naan bread. There's barbecue glazed chicken as well, that looks alright. The wedges, I'm not overly keen on the look of that, and these green beans, but a bit more chorizo here, Spanish chorizo and pepper rice, that looks alright. Herby meatballs and linguine, that does look quite good with a bit of cheese there, it looks like in the picture. Chicken fried rice as well, that's alright, isn't it? Middle Eastern style spiced lamb and rice. Good bits of spice there this week. Halloumi and roasted aubergine burger, not for me. Middle Eastern inspired pepper and chickpea something or other, again, probably not for me. But the korma and mango chutney glazed chicken, I'd give that a go. Chili beef burrito bowl as well, that looks alright. And you've got pulled teriyaki duck and all, which sounds quite nice, doesn't it? Lamb steak with a red wine jus as well, I'd eat that. Barbecue jerk style chicken and mango glazed something or other, that sounds quite nice, doesn't it? Sirloin steak and peppercorn sauce, simple, can't really go wrong with that. They've got more of those nanzas as well, nanitsas, the little pizzas on naan breads, there's quite a few of them. So go to the link in the show notes to get 50% off your first box and then 35% off your next 3 boxes. That's the link in the show notes for this show, the description underneath, for 50% off your first box and then 35% off your next 3 boxes. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit. When one of the main characters speaks to that journalist and tells the truth, the journalist then responds like he's just talking nonsense, gibberish, gaslighting him to make him confused. A way of telling us that the news doesn't want the truth. The news isn't going to tell people what's actually going on. The only way to hear the truth is through truth seeking, which is another podcast that's well worth a listen. But that's a different thing. The news is being represented in this film very literally by someone who works for the news, and then whenever they hear the truth they don't like it. They want chaos, they want unfettered chaos. This character, they're breaking into houses and all sorts, they're mental, but they're also lying constantly and making you lie, making you second guess your reality. Now that journalist is showing that they changed their story as well, and they lied about who they were. They also, right, are wearing a red hat, which, now if I'm not mistaken, is something that the QAnoners believe. I think they believe in the red hat that's going to change the future, though I'm very happy to be wrong on that one. I'm not that well versed in QAnon canon, the canonical QAnon. Either way, I don't know that much about it. I just know they've got this thing about hats and people wearing different hats, and they also, I think, have this thing about time travel and the Whore of Babylon, and they would wear red. And in this film, the journalist is a woman who wears red, so in essence could be the Whore of Babylon. But some people think Trump's the Whore of Babylon, and there's this whole thing going on. It's very hard to follow and very difficult because it seems to be a thing that's constantly evolving every day or every other day story-wise. So it's very hard to refer back to. But back to the film, we then could look at this whole thing as a way for someone somewhere to try and manipulate people into not working at jobs that they don't like. The guy that seems to be the main focus of the film is an insurance salesman who hates his life. Now that's a good job. It makes lots of money, just keeps him busy, you know. Yet he's saying he isn't happy in that, but now he's back as a kid, and maybe it's a way to try and trick young people into not working jobs as readily, so that more things over the following years could become automated. Like checkouts in shops, you know, when you serve yourself, self-service checkouts, and using forms on the computer, you know, instead of speaking to receptionists when you ring the doctors, or actually speaking to a GP anymore, you just fill in a questionnaire on the computer instead of having actual doctor's appointments. Then, we see that this journalist, as she calls herself, is happy that people have deviated from the plan and says that's a good thing. But if everyone did that, surely the world would be a fucking mess. If no one did what they said they would do, what would be getting done? And the film hits back at this by saying that making that little change managed to cause 33 deaths, including his dad, who died of E. coli, because one character lost a bet, right? This is a little bit later, but there's a part where because one character lost a bet, he now has to suck his friend off in a bathroom whilst everyone else in the bar watches, which seems like it's trying to turn people away from gambling, doesn't it? But gambling's a thing that just keeps getting bigger and bigger, so then maybe it's a way of trying to big up virtual gambling as well, because that's become an awful lot bigger, meaning this could be a way to stop people from gambling illegally and to stop people gambling face to face and only do it virtually, because at least if you're just throwing money on a virtual roulette wheel or fucking horse racing from your phone while you're sat on the toilet, then if you lose, you don't have to suck your friend off in the bathroom because you've not told some stranger that you would. Do you know what I mean? Like, it makes sense in a way. Now, there's something that I've brought up in previous shows that seems to be a thing in this film as well. The younger guy can see a person that the other people can't see. Now, in this film, that guy's Chevy Chase. Now, when I was a kid, I'm pretty sure I've brought this up before, I may not have done. I used to see this very tall, dark-skinned creature with little horns on its head. Other times, it would be an old woman that I would see that would sit on the top of the stairs and, like, talk at me. I don't really remember what they said, I just can see them in my face, in my head when I think about them. So, except in this film, it's Chevy Chase, right? It's not an old woman. It's not a weird, scaly, horned creature. You know, and it seems to be a sign to the viewer anyway that there are things that certain people can't see and that others can see, maybe younger people. Maybe that's why computers have become so popular. This guy sits in a room all day on his laptop playing games, never truly experiencing reality, meaning, right, that when he does go outside, it's going to be harder to perceive real and fake, meaning that children are growing up now who are always on the mum's tablets rather than playing with toys or with their friends outside in the garden and that, seeing real things, and they might struggle, you know. Then, just like the tulpas that we spoke of last week in last week's episode, well, the big episode before this, these otherworldly entities, or the Chevy Chases of the world, might be able to properly form in our reality because enough people at this point are going to believe that they're real, so these tulpas can get physical manifestations. They aren't seeing other things in the world outside, you know, the people that are staying on the computers all the time. They're not seeing things in the world outside to open and realise that there's something weird about this weird, scaly black humanoid that watches them when they're in the bathroom. That's all they'll know. That's normal, meaning all the other children with imaginary friends will keep theirs in the world as well, and then these ethereal creatures can properly invade our planet or reality by taking the forms of these imaginary creatures, imaginary friends and monsters that every child is scared of. Chevy Chase speaks in these weird riddles as well, which does seem pretty similar to how messages have been received by people, because a lot of them say things like, I couldn't understand exactly what they were saying, but I felt it. Meaning that they inferred from whatever was said the message, just like this guy in the film keeps doing, the younger guy that keeps fading in and out of existence. Now, this seems significant in a way, because a lot of alien abduction stuff, they say that these creatures spoke, and it might have been speaking like that, but in their head they're hearing fucking words and they're making sense of it all. Now, there's not much happening to take note of in the film at this point for quite a while, but that journalist does come back and tries to tempt the character a third time in a weird, almost biblical way. She's still got the red hat on and whispers something about the universe to him, like the universe will bring us together, we'll control the universe, as if to say that the journalists control reality and the future, and they're the ones who weave the tapestry, if you like, if you're into your Norse mythology. Then we see the people from the future frantically searching through the house of this typical 1980s gang of posh kids, searching for this chemical from the future. Now, could this be a nod to the Anunnaki and the way that they travelled here to mine for a resource? The Anunnaki came for gold, but the future people are looking for the Chernobyl and the chemical in it that sounded an awful lot like DMT, which again brings up the sensory deprivation tanks. But with the Anunnaki and this chemical, could that be another little thing that's builds to my theory of why sewerage systems were built in order to be able to get this chemical that we produce, that the Anunnaki put in us, and able to be make it easier to mine gold, and they mine it through us. That's why they collect our shit and piss. But getting back into the film, we then see how someone from the future could use sexual trauma to influence someone in the past to change the future that they know. Now, the character who's been cheated on in the present rings up his wife, who at the time is only 9 years old, and starts shouting her down on the phone about how she's been sucking someone else's dick and asking if it was bigger and all that sort of stuff. Now, that means that this character's exposing a child to sex and scaring that child at the same time, possibly in order to ready us for doing it when we travel back in time and maybe have to work for the CIA or their equivalent in order to fix a problem in our present. And that's why all the posh people in America rape kids. Then we see the bad guys riding on a snowmobile that looks like it says the word Pfizer, which I just thought was interesting. Not got anything to say about it, just thought it was interesting that the bad guys are on a thing sponsored by Pfizer. It just flashes up as well, it doesn't even stay on screen for long. I was also thinking, it's weird how all of this stuff's happening in the snow. Could it be some form of flat earth reference, or maybe about people that travelled to or from the other side of the ice, like what they showed us in The Last Airbender, and we discussed a bit in that episode. Now, we do find out that the bald bloke is the young guy's dad, but they have to go back in time in order to be able to make that happen, much like in Terminator. And I was wondering if this could be a way to explain the weird increases in population, where population apparently doubles around the world every 25 years. If everyone's going back in time at some point and then shagging someone different, and then that person becomes a kid, well, that person becomes pregnant and then has the kid, right? What does that mean for the world, mate? That means, right, that if they're all going back in time, it shows off that they can then predict the future as well, or they just know a better way to behave, that they'll all be getting their ends away, shagging everyone left, right and centre. This means that suddenly more people are sprouting up everywhere, but all of these people already exist in that timeline that they're being born in because they were made in the past. However, up until that moment, they wouldn't have existed in the original timeline that this person's come from. So this proves in a way that timelines don't exist, even though all of these people must have existed all along in all these different timelines. Then the quote-unquote scientists just try to pretend that all of this is because of some statistic, this increase in population, even though science made loads of advancements in contraception in recent years. Maybe they've made contraception better so that they can go back and fuck women without consequence. Maybe, whilst you're out at work, time-travelling version of yourself comes back from the future, takes over your body, and then in the eyes of an SJW, rapes your other half and then flicks back to their own time, but only after dropping you off back at work. But with this contraception thing getting better and better, what if they know that this time travel thing happens every 30 or 40 years? That's why we're focused on time travel occurring in the late 80s. Well, in the 80s. And they're thinking, fuck, so that means it could happen 40 years later in the 20s. So we need to make sure contraception's as good as it is now to stop all of this happening again. Because what if something from the future's coming back to have kids so that they can control their monopoly, if you like, of the world? But if we can stop these women from becoming pregnant by these other people travelling back in time, maybe we can overthrow these people. But that's just a little thought from me. Now, the film gets onto a lot of stuff about suicide again and trying to give the guy from the start a reason to live. Then we see the weather getting manipulated by the hot tub using that Russian drink and chemicals, which gives us that little nod towards weather manipulation again, like we got at the start. And this feels like it's just getting towards the end of the film now, like it's trying to wrap it up. So it's nice that it has referenced the weather control again, and maybe even chemicals being used to control the weather. It's a little chemtrail sort of nod there. And we see the bald guy stays behind in the 1980s. And this, as well, seems to tie in with a lot more of what the QAnon stuff is and about how Trump's supposed to be a time traveller and his family's a family of time travellers. It ties in with the idea of people staying around and making sure time moves in the right direction. Also, the bald guy's pretty much dressed in black, which might be significant because of, like the Men in Black and that. Then, we see that the bald guy's manipulated time to become rich and has become Google, calling it Loogle. Maybe the most overt way of saying that Google, or maybe even Alphabet, is the big guy who uses and manipulates time in order to fix time to the way that they want it to be. Somehow, the journalist is in the home of the main character now in the future, showing that the media and Google work together in order to manipulate time, or at least the perception of time as we know it. We also see that they can use technology and the sexual trauma on kids works in order to be able to make them act a certain way, because we find out that that guy's wife that cheated on him has now never cheated on him because of some phone call she received from some weirdo, which was a few hours and simultaneously 20 years ago, telling her about sucking a dick. It also starts to introduce people to this concept of the Mandela effect. There's Loogle instead of Google, and there's Motley Lou instead of Motley Crue. That's the two that I noticed, but there might be more. But if that's easy to change, if it's that simple in this to change things like that, and then 5 or 6 people still remember the original Google, but now it's all Loogle to everybody else in the world, that shows that the Mandela effect could happen, and maybe there's just multiple Mandela effects that we all happen and we all notice. Maybe we travel back in time and don't even notice it, and something little changes, but we remember this other thing. Who knows? This just seems like a really nice way of being able to show how the Mandela effect could work in practice. At least the theory, show it in theory. What this film does explain, though, is why so many people seem to act like everything just suddenly changed. Because if you think about it, if you speak to people, right, they think that things just suddenly changed one day, and they act all confused and disorientated all the time. I know a lot of my family do. Maybe that's why the governments of the world seem so adamant about getting people hooked on opiates, so that life does become some weird form of blur and hard to follow, whilst they send their agents back repeatedly to the 1980s to make these little changes that's needed for them to constantly keep control of the world. Kind of like the Time Police, which is another name of one of the early episodes, if you want to go and give that a go and learn more about them. They've come up a lot actually in this show. I think it's weird as well to think that people can just slip into a new life so easily, which makes it seem like this must be a commonplace in Hollywood, because that bit of the film's just glazed right over. These people don't give a shit that they don't know their wives and don't know any of this stuff that's going on around them. But that's it. That's all the hidden messages I could find. There was a little bit of propaganda in there in the Hot Tub Time Machine, but, not too much. Probably more programming of the brain than anything. Either way, if you've got a film that you'd like me to cover, and it's easy for me to get a hold of, join the Discord, and you can find it in the link tree in the bottom of this, and leave it as a message in there, and I'll add it to the list. If you want to hear more shows, and want to find what seems to be like a growing diary of my thoughts, then join the Patreon for £3 a month, and you can get what's got to be at least a few days of exclusive videos and audio recordings of the things I think about. And anyway, you can find all the links you want by tapping the Linktree link in the description. I'll fucking see you in a bit, mate.